Let me tell you what they did to her. Not what happened to her. What they did. Because there is a difference, and that difference matters. She was a woman who loved with her whole chest. A woman who believed that when you gave someone your trust, they carried it carefully. She was wrong. And it cost her everything. The crime, specific, sharp. He didn't just break her heart. He took her name and dragged it through her own contact list, messages sent to her friends, her family, her colleagues, calling her a fraud. Labeling her dishonest. Painting the picture of a woman she had never been, to people whose respect she had spent years earning. And while he was sending those lies, he was also walking away from $355,000 in debt that he had put in her name. $355,000. Say that number slowly. Let it sit in your chest for a second. That is not a mistake. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a calculated, cold-blooded decision to ruin a human being from the inside out. So she did what strong women do when no one is looking. She survived. Double shifts. Oxtail dinners eaten alone at midnight, the only warmth in a life that had gone completely dark. No social life. No trust. No safety. Just debt letters on the kitchen table and the particular kind of silence that falls when shame has driven everyone away. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. She wasn't living. She was enduring. One breath at a time. One day at a time. In a city that didn't know her pain and didn't stop moving long enough to ask. And the worst part? Somewhere in that same city, a man who had never met her, never touched her hand, never heard her voice in waking life, was dreaming about her. Every single night, for 5 years, he saw her face. He knew the shape of her smile. He knew the warmth that came off her skin like sunlight through old library windows. He was smiling with her. Laughing with her. Loving a woman whose name he didn't even know yet. While she was drowning. He was dreaming. She was breaking. And neither of them knew the other existed. Until one October afternoon. In a library that smelled like old paper and second chances. When the universe, tired of watching them both suffer alone, finally decided it was time to close the distance. This is their story. And I promise you, you have never heard anything like it. Elias Thorne had everything a man could build with money and discipline. Rare manuscripts locked behind climate-controlled glass. A reputation that moved through elite literary circles like a quiet current, felt before it was seen. A life so perfectly ordered it barely made a sound. And none of it, not one piece of it, filled the space she occupied in his sleep. Because every night, she came back. Her voice, low and warm, the kind that made a room feel smaller in the best possible way. Her laughter, not performed, not polished, real. The kind that catches in a person's throat before it escapes. And the way she looked at him. Like he was not just seen. Like he was chosen. She would touch his hand sometimes, barely, just fingertips, and something in his chest would go completely still. Like every restless thing inside him had finally found where it was supposed to land. He started going to sleep early. On purpose. Because waking life had everything. And only his dreams had her. Now let us talk about Imani. Because while Elias was sleeping his way toward a woman he couldn't name, Imani Baptiste was learning what it costs to love someone who was already planning his exit before you ever felt safe enough to stay. He hadn't been a stranger. That is the part that cuts deepest. He had been close enough that she let him in. Close enough that she signed her name, her actual name, on loan documents, on credit lines, on financial agreements she trusted because she trusted him. And he walked away clean. Took the money. Took the future she thought they were building together. And left her standing in the rubble of a life she didn't recognize anymore. What followed was not just debt. It was disappearance. The friends who stopped calling because the story he told about her arrived in their inboxes before she ever had a chance to speak. The family members who went quiet in that careful way people go quiet when they don't know what to believe. Her reputation, the one she had built quietly, honestly, over years, dismantled in a single wave of messages she never got to read before the damage was done. She went to work. She came home. She paid what she could. She slept very little. She spoke even less. And in the spaces between, she sat with a particular kind of grief that has no clean name, the grief of someone who was robbed not just of money, but of the version of herself that still believed people were safe. The scene, midnight, alone, still dignified. Picture her on a Tuesday night. Past midnight. The city still moving outside her window like the world had no idea what was happening inside that apartment. A plate of oxtail going cold beside her because she sat down too tired to eat and couldn't find the will to lift the fork. Still in her work clothes. Still upright. Back straight even when everything else had caved. That is dignity. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that nobody applauds because nobody is watching. And across that city, in a townhouse full of rare books and cathedral silence, Elias turned in his sleep. He didn't know her name yet. He had no reason to feel anything. But something shifted in him that night, a restlessness he couldn't place, an ache with no clear source. Like a frequency he was tuned to had gone suddenly, terribly quiet. He didn't know why. He just knew something, somewhere, was wrong. That is the woman he would fall in love with. Not the dream. Not the face his sleeping mind had constructed from longing and hope and 5 years of searching. The survivor. The woman eating cold oxtail alone at midnight with her back still straight. The woman who had every reason to collapse, and chose, quietly, devastatingly, not to. That woman. Her. It was October. One of those Philadelphia Saturdays where the city remembers it is beautiful, the kind of cool that doesn't bite, just brushes. The Benjamin Franklin Parkway stretched wide and golden under an autumn sky, and the annual book crawl had pulled the city's literary faithful out of their quiet apartments and into the streets. People moved with books tucked under their arms like they were carrying something precious. Because they were. But inside the Parkway Central Library, the noise of the city fell away completely. The Beaux-Arts ceiling held the hush like a cathedral holds prayer. Amber light pressed down through tall windows onto shelves that had been standing longer than most of the people walking beneath them. And on the third floor, in the rare book department, the air was thick with something ancient and specific, the scent of wood breaking slowly into vanilla, of pages exhaling the stored breath of centuries. Velichor. The beautiful sadness of old books. It lived in that room like a permanent resident. In the corner, mounted in glass, a stuffed raven watched the room with glass eyes that somehow still felt like judgment. Elias had been in that room 100 times. He knew every case, every artifact, every manuscript behind every locked panel. This was his world, controlled, catalogued, certain. He turned the corner of a shelf the way a man turns a corner in his own home. And then the air changed. Not dramatically. Not with sound or light or any of the things stores use to signal a moment. Just changed. The way a room changes when something in it finally makes sense. His body understood before his mind caught up. His steps slowed without instruction. And when he looked up, there she was. Standing beside a display of medieval manuscripts, her dark skin catching the amber light like it had been waiting specifically for her to stand in it. The curve of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the particular stillness of a woman who had learned to take up less space than she deserved. He had seen that face 10,000 times. In the dark. In the place behind sleep where the mind goes when it stops pretending. It was her. Imani felt him before she turned. That was the thing about 2 years of betrayal. It rewired a person. Made them sensitive to shifts in the air the way an animal is sensitive to weather before it arrives. She had learned, painfully, to notice when someone was looking at her with too much intention. She had learned that attention was not always safe. So she went still. Shoulders tightening beneath her coat. Eyes finding the exit without making it obvious. Every instinct sharpened and aimed at the door. He did not ask her to trust him. He knew better than that. A woman who had been ruined by trust did not need another man standing in a library asking her to hand hers over like it cost nothing. So he did something else entirely. He reached into the leather satchel at his side and set a journal on the reading table between them. Then another. Then a third. Worn covers. Dates written in careful ink along the spines. 5 years of them, one for every year he had been dreaming of a woman whose name he could not find in waking life. He said nothing. Just opened the first page and stepped back, giving her the distance to decide. Imani looked at the journal the way you look at something that has no right to exist, with suspicion first, then with the slow, reluctant surrender of a person confronted with something they cannot explain away. She picked it up. Read. And her hands began to tremble. Not violently, just the finest, barely visible tremor. The kind a body produces when the mind is processing something too large for it to hold quietly. Because written on those pages, in handwriting she had never seen before, was her. Her voice, described with an accuracy that no stranger should possess. Her laugh, the specific one, the unguarded one she hadn't allowed herself in 2 years. The way she tilted her head when something mattered. The warmth she gave off in a room without meaning to. All of it. Documented. Dated. Real. Elias watched her read. Not the pages, her. He had waited 5 years for this moment, and he was not going to spend it looking at words he already knew by heart. He thought, very clearly, very quietly, that if she walked away right now, he would lose her twice. Once from the dream. Once from the only moment reality had ever offered him that came close to feeling like enough. He kept very still. And he waited. She turned a page and her fingers met his where they rested at the journal's edge. Neither of them moved. The contact was nothing, a graze, a half-second of skin against skin in a room full of century-old paper and held breath. And yet something passed between them that had no name in any of the manuscripts surrounding them. Something old. Something decided. She pulled her hand back first. He let her. And then Imani Baptiste closed the journal, set it precisely back on the table, and looked at him with eyes that were full, not of softness, but of something far more complicated than that. She said, "Why should I believe any of this is real and not just another story a man built to get close to me? Not cruel. Not cold. Just honest, with the directness of a woman who had paid very dearly for the last time she chose to believe without asking that question first." Elias did not flinch. He did not perform wounded. He simply held her gaze and told her the truth, that she shouldn't. Not yet. That belief was something he intended to earn, one day at a time, for however long she needed, and that he was not going anywhere. It was the first time in 2 years that someone had responded to her doubt with patience instead of pressure. She noticed that. She filed it carefully. And she did not walk away. He crossed the room slowly. Not cautiously, slowly. The way a person moves when they are afraid that speed might break something irreplaceable. He stopped close enough to speak, far enough to give her the choice to stay or go. And then he said her name. Not a question. Not an introduction. Just her name. Spoken the way you say the name of something you have searched for across a very long distance and cannot quite believe you are finally standing in front of. Imani. She turned. And whatever she had prepared herself to feel, suspicion, alarm, the cold readiness she wore like armor, none of it arrived. Because his face was not the face of a threat. It was the face of someone who looked at her the way she had forgotten it was possible to be looked at. Like she was not a problem to be managed. Like she was not a debt. Like she was, simply, completely, exactly where she was supposed to be. He said her name like he had been waiting 5 years to finally say it out loud. And the terrible, frightening, quietly miraculous thing was that it sounded like he had. He did not ask her to trust him. He knew better than that. A woman who had been ruined by trust did not need another man standing in a library asking her to hand hers over like it cost nothing. So he did something else entirely. Elias did not flinch. He did not perform wounded. He simply held her gaze and told her the truth, that she shouldn't. Not yet. That belief was something he intended to earn, one day at a time, for however long she needed, and that he was not going anywhere. It was the first time in 2 years that someone had responded to her doubt with patience instead of pressure. She noticed that. She filed it carefully. And she did not walk away. The more she told him, the quieter he became. Not the quiet of a man growing distant. The quiet of a man pressing every feeling he has behind a wall so that she does not have to manage his reaction on top of her own pain. He asked her one question, just one, and he asked it the way a man asks something when he already understands that the answer is going to cost him his composure. Who did this to you? Within a week, a lawyer Imani had never heard of contacted her about her fraudulent debt. Within 2, a financial recovery specialist had begun disputing charges attached to her name without her consent. Elias made calls she never saw him make. Moved resources she never asked him to move. He did not announce it. He did not present it. He simply handled it. The way a man handles something when he has decided, privately and completely, that it will not continue. When she found out, she came to him with her jaw set and her eyes clear and said, "I don't need a savior." And she meant it. Every syllable. 2 years of surviving alone had not made her desperate for rescue. It had made her certain that she would rather carry the weight herself than owe anyone the kind of debt that came with strings. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, without blinking, he said, "Good. Because I'm not here to save you. I'm here to stand with you." And something in the room shifted. Not loudly. Just permanently. They started spending Saturdays together the way people spend time when neither of them is ready to call it what it is. Harriet's bookshop in Fishtown. The narrow aisles of Cupid's in Manayunk, where the shelves were painted the color of a valentine no one had been brave enough to send yet. They moved through these spaces slowly, 2 people learning the rhythm of each other without making a formal agreement to do so. He would read beside her, not to her. That distinction mattered to Imani, and he understood it without being told. Sometimes their shoulders touched along the full length of an aisle and neither of them adjusted. He noticed every time. He filed every time. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has decided, quietly and without announcement, belongs to him, not in ownership, but in devotion. When a man in Cupid's held a door open for her and let his attention linger 2 seconds longer than the door required, Elias said nothing. He simply stepped closer. Just enough. The man moved on. Imani noticed. She said nothing either, but the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, and that was enough. Then one afternoon, deep in a debate about whether brooding billionaire romance heroes were aspirational or a public health concern, Imani Baptiste laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the careful, managed sound she had been producing for 2 years to signal she was fine. A real one, the unguarded kind that catches in the throat first, surprised by itself before it escapes. Elias went completely still. He thought, very clearly, that he would spend every dollar he had just to hear that sound one more time. And then he thought that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never had a reason to ration it again. She caught him staring. Raised an eyebrow. Said, "You do know you are literally the brooding billionaire, right?" He considered this seriously for a moment. Then said, "I prefer the term emotionally complex archivist with liquidity." She laughed again. This time, he was ready for it. This time, he let himself smile back, slow and full and completely unguarded, like a man who had just been handed back something he thought he had lost for good. It happened on a Thursday. Past 11. The kind of late where the city outside had finally stopped performing and the silence inside a room becomes something you can feel against your skin. They were sitting on the floor of his library, surrounded by open books neither of them was reading anymore, when something in Imani went very quiet and then broke all at once. She started talking and she did not stop. 2 years of held breath leaving her body in one long, unsteady exhale. The shame of it. The specific loneliness of being publicly humiliated by someone who knew exactly which parts of her were most exposed. The nights she sat with debt letters on her lap and told herself she was fine when she was so far from fine the word had lost all meaning. Her voice broke somewhere in the middle. She did not apologize for it. Elias did not interrupt. Did not offer solutions or perspective or any of the things people reach for when silence makes them uncomfortable. He simply stayed. Fully present, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him, a man who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can give another person is the assurance that you are not going anywhere while they fall apart. When the tears came, she didn't try to stop them. He reached up, slowly, asking with the movement before his hand arrived, and wiped them from her face with his thumb. She let him. And then, with the careful weight of someone who has not allowed themselves to lean on anything in a very long time, she rested her head against his chest. He brought his arm around her. Said nothing. Just held her, like something he had been trusted with and intended to handle accordingly. Then, very quietly, he said, "You don't get to carry this alone anymore." And she exhaled, deep and slow, like a woman setting down something she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it wasn't part of her body. She lifted her head to look at him. Their faces close, closer than they had been before, close enough that the next movement belonged to one of them and both of them knew it. He looked at her mouth. Then back at her eyes. And he waited. Because she had been robbed of choice by someone who never asked. He was not going to be the second man who decided for her. She didn't close the distance. Not yet. But she didn't move away either. And in the space between them, charged and held and entirely unresolved, something was understood that neither of them needed words to say. Slowly, not suddenly, not dramatically, but the way real healing moves, which is gradually and then all at once, Imani began returning to herself. The credit score climbed. Dispute by dispute, month by month, the financial wreckage her ex had engineered began to give way beneath the weight of documentation, persistence, and a lawyer who did not stop. She stood a little straighter at work. Laughed a little freer in public. Started wearing color again, small choices that meant large things to anyone paying close enough attention. Elias was paying close attention. She started texting first. Small things, a book she thought he'd argue with, a sentence she underlined and couldn't stop thinking about. But it was her reaching toward him now, and he felt the difference in his chest every single time her name appeared on his screen. When they were together, her touches lingered. A hand on his arm that stayed a half-second past casual. Her shoulder finding his in a bookshop aisle and not moving away. She was choosing him, quietly, deliberately, without yet saying so out loud. At a Caribbean heritage event on a warm Saturday afternoon, a man approached Imani with the particular confidence of someone who had decided the answer was already yes. He was charming. Attentive. He leaned in when she spoke, like her words were worth the proximity. Elias watched from 3 feet away with a glass in his hand and an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. He did not intervene. He did not perform. He simply waited until the man excused himself, then stepped to Imani's side, close, unhurried, and said, low enough that only she could hear it, "He can look. But he doesn't get to know you." Imani turned to look at him. Something moved behind her eyes, not alarm, not protest. Something warmer than both. She said nothing. But she turned back to the room and leaned, just slightly, just enough, into his side. And he stayed exactly where he was. Like a man who had finally arrived somewhere he intended to remain. They went back to the library. It was October again. Exactly 2 years from the afternoon the air had shifted in the rare book department, and Elias had turned a corner and found the woman he had spent half a decade looking for in the dark. The parkway stretched golden outside. The city moved below them, unhurried, indifferent, the way cities always are to the enormous things happening quietly inside their buildings. They stood on the skyline terrace. Philadelphia spread out beneath them like a sentence that had finally found its end. That morning, Imani had made her last payment. 2 years of double shifts and disputed charges and credit reports she had checked the way you check a wound, carefully, bracing for news. All of it, done. The number that had defined and diminished and followed her like a shadow had finally reached 0. She had stood in her kitchen alone for a full minute, her hand flat on the counter, just breathing. Not celebrating. Just arriving. Into a life that was fully, completely, legally her own again. Standing beside her on the terrace, Elias looked out over the city for a moment. Then he looked at her, the way he always looked at her, like she was the only thing in any room worth the direction. He said, "I used to dream about you. Every night, for 5 years, I dreamed about you. But this is better." Her response, strong, grounded, choosing love. Imani turned to face him. And this is the part that matters most, because she did not melt. She did not collapse into him with relief or gratitude or the desperate energy of someone who needed love to feel whole. She looked at him with the full, clear, unguarded eyes of a woman who had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to her and come out the other side with her discernment intact. She said, "I know. And I'm choosing you anyway. Not because I need you. Because you are the one I want to be standing next to when I don't." He reached up and touched her face, one hand, carefully, the way you touch something you have waited a very long time to be allowed to hold. And then he kissed her. Slowly. With the full, unhurried weight of a man who was not rushing toward anything because he had already arrived. She kissed him back, not surrendering, not yielding, meeting him. Completely. As an equal. As a woman who had decided, with her whole rebuilt self, that this was where she chose to be. The city carried on below them. The October air moved between the buildings. And somewhere in the rare book department 3 floors beneath their feet, the Velature settled in the amber light, patient and permanent, like it had known all along how this was going to end. He had dreamed of her for 5 years. But his dreams had finally ended, because reality had become something better than anything his sleeping mind had ever been able to construct. And she had survived everything, so that she could choose this. Freely. Fully. On her own terms. That is the story. That is all of it. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear them. Thank you for watching and goodbye.